Okay, I think that's our cue. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar on building generative AI evals for the real world. Um, my name is Oscar. I'm one of the solutions engineers over here at Encord, and we're delighted today to be joined by Russ, who's come from Weights and Biases. Russ, would you like to do a quick intro to yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much, Oscar, and thank you for having me on as part of the webinar today. I am, as you can see on this slide, a work in product marketing over at Weights and Biases, take care of content messaging, that kind of stuff, but also delve quite frequently into the technical side of things. So also building demos and whatnot, but have some application experience and have certainly witnessed and experienced firsthand the need for well-built evaluation. So I'm very happy and excited to discuss this topic today.
Fantastic. Yeah, we're really excited to have you as today, Russ. And yes, both have an experience in excellent YouTube demonstrations as well. So I know that we're connected over that as well as Gen AI evals. So we can start by setting out the agenda for today's session. So basically, what we learn from today's call. The starting point, we'll look at why it's important to build out your eval process when you're deploying AI in the real world and in production. Then we can go through the actual methods of evaluation, what this used to look like, what this currently looks like, and what this is going to look like in the future. Then we can actually go through building these rubrics, and we'll go through a definition of what rubrics are and how to design those. And then we will basically go through an implementation where we'll show how we can design rubrics in Encord and use that for human evaluation, then how we can monitor and track these experiments in Weights and Biases. We will finish up with any questions from the audience for both of us, and then we can take those. So please put those into the chat during the session. Great. So to start off with, just wanted to introduce Encord. So for those of you not familiar, Encord is a data development platform. And what that means is that we can do everything from data management, curation, identifying the right data for your task, to labeling annotation, and then also as part of that offering, can offer human evals for Gen AI use case, including pairwise comparison, RLHF flows, and scoring and preference ranking as well. So we can go through some of those more specific examples later on in the call, but that's just an introduction to us.
And I guess that's my cue to introduce Weights and Biases, the AI developer platform to build AI agents and applications. And the primary goal of Weights and Biases as an AI developer platform, we've kind of pinpointed three different developer needs that we're aspiring to meet: speed, safety, flexibility. So speed, obviously being able to iterate quickly, optimize, improve, building AI applications and agents. This all starts with implementation, which really requires just one line of code, but then also being able to do experiment tracking inside of Weights and Biases in real time, be able to access the results from your experiments immediately, and share these and collaborate with other members of your team for decision making. Safety, this comes in a couple of different forms. One is just governance inside of the system, making sure that the right members of the team have access to the right artifacts, the ones that they should be able to see and view and use, but also from the end user perspective, when we're talking about AI applications, being able to safeguard and put guardrails in place so that people aren't seeing or experiencing things that they shouldn't or having a bad user experience. And then finally, flexibility. And this is, we don't want to impose or prescribe too much. We want to allow you to use the tools that you're used to using in-house, that you have experience with. This really kind of ties into what we're talking about today, and being able to work together with Encord in this better together story to be able to adopt, incorporate evaluations from Encord. And Weights and Biases really as a platform has two primary tool sets that developers use to build AI applications. The first is appropriately named models. This is where developers, machine learning engineers can build models, whether it be training or fine tuning. And this is done, this is brought from an experiment tracking perspective into the workspace, as I mentioned. And evaluations play some role in this. A lot of our users will automate training and then running inference and then using benchmarks or tests such as MMLU or HelloSwag in order to evaluate some of their stuff. But really, the evaluations come into play, especially in the context that we're discussing today, in our other product, which is on the next slide, which is Weave. And this is kind of the observability tool for building AI agents and applications. And we have here evaluate, monitor, and iterate. This is tracking and tracing all of the inputs, outputs, code, metadata from your AI applications and making them quickly available for quick decision making so that you see every bit of relevant data that you need to be able to tell whether your application or agent is performing well. And then be able to optimize it from there. Using evaluations, quickly iterating, and being able to optimize. And we've put a lot of emphasis in this product on comparisons, being able to drill down and interact with the product in order to see how are different versions of the application, whether it be prompts, RAG content, different models that you're using, how are they performing in relation to one another? So we want to make that information accessible, available very quickly, so that you can make decisions about how to best optimize and then come up with the best product to release. So maybe a little more than you were hoping for there. Spent a little time, but that's a description of Weights and Biases as a platform.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Russ. And yeah, as we said at the top, very excited, as you mentioned, to kind of discuss this as a partnership and say that that data democratization, where you can have your teams for your experiments and your models and your pipelines, and in the same way that Uncle can provide that for the data side, which is why we're super excited to talk about this from a kind of combined perspective today. But I think to kick off, we can move into the topic du jour and start discussing evals in particular. So, Russ, I think I'll throw it back to you to kick off. But why are evals important when we're thinking about deploying generative AI?
Right. So, full disclosure, when you sent over the deck for this and the speaker's notes, you alluded to one of our taglines, which is AI and building AI applications are easy to demo, but hard to productionize, right? Hard to feel confident about putting into production. And that's really where evaluations come into play, because anyone who's kind of whether toyed around or even has a lot of experience building these applications, as anyone knows, it is relatively easy, whether through an API or some kind of graphical user interface, to build a simple AI application, whether it be a chat bot or anything else. But once you start playing around with it and sharing and let other people playing around with it, you find so quickly that you need to start putting guardrails around things, that sometimes hallucinations and strange answers are presented as output. And so you really want to hone in and nail down, right, to create the most accurate and a good user experience in the application that you've created. So evaluations are what allow you to do that. And whether these be kind of LLM as a judge evaluations or human in the loop, human evaluations, you need this feedback. You need to see your application in action. You have a number of points here that, from addressing bias to optimization. We think a lot about evaluations and improving performance of applications along 4 dimensions: quality, cost, latency, and safety. And so, bias, this can be toxicity, this can be, is this thing outputting bad information? But evaluations really give you visibility into the application and let you know what you need to work on, what you need to tune.
Absolutely, yes. And I think you touched on a few really key points there. Being able to really test your model in deployment, you can leverage kind of traditional binary or metric-based evals. But if we're looking at deploying applications that are driving business impacts and are being used by humans, then the only way to make sure that these are aligned to our purpose and that these are secure is to basically have humans go in and test them. And by that deployment, you touched on it when you were describing the different workflows within weights and bias. But if we're thinking about this iteration speed, then using evals, they can basically be the core of this iteration of how fast can you get your product tested, how fast can you identify the weaknesses, and then how fast can you build and fix and deploy. And that's effectively what this loop is looking like in the real world today.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think before we jump forward, then what we'll do is we'll kind of look back, and we've touched on a few examples there in your summary where we're thinking about traditional evaluation, right? So this might be a binary success fail. This might be where we have some traditional eval metrics, BLEU or Rouge, where basically we're comparing our model output to a kind of golden source of truth and then statistically extracting a score. So this sort of traditional metric based comparison can lead to models finding easy routes to improvement and kind of hack through these. And basically, why we need to think about these rubrics, which is what we're going to look at next, is when we're thinking about really applying the business context and the human context to our models, then we need to extend beyond those traditional metrics. But Russ, have you got any nice examples or use cases of where you've seen a team that were kind of restricted when they were using basic metrics? And I don't know, you gave an example of a chatbot or something like that.
Yes, and I will stick with the example of the chatbot. And spoiler alert, you'll see an example of the chatbot later on in the demo. But you mentioned blue and rouge, and these are these end up being kind of black and white, right or wrong, right? Binary answers. It's either yes or no. And the support chatbot that you alluded to, one of the things that it's able to do is make decisions about whether individuals can return a product or not, and uses RAG content to make that decision. So if I opened, this is an electronics retailer we're speaking of, let's say, if I opened up a laptop and I want to return it now, can I still return it? Now, the return policy is very clear on that, whether it can be returned or not. So that's a one or a zero. That's a yes or a no. But you then start to think about, is the user experience good with this chatbot? It's important for the chatbot to be giving the right answers, but you also want someone to feel that they are being attended to. You don't want them to feel like they're just being, treated, uh, you know, by a robot making these decisions, that they're having a positive user experience. So this is where we can start to evaluate less in a less traditional method. Is the chatbot friendly? Is it polite? Is it speaking in terms that the user can understand? So you quickly do move beyond the black and white traditional stuff into, I want the user experience to be good because that's what's going to keep people coming back. That's what's going to keep people, making exchanges instead of simple return. I want them to be a repeat customer in the case of the chatbot. So these evaluations become increasingly important.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that case is really nice, and I know you alluded that we'll continue with this chatbot analogy. I think I like it because it's so intuitive as a person who interacts with AI systems. It's like it's such a kind of intuitive application for Gen AI, and that outcome that you described of yes, I may have gotten in contact with a store to want to return my item, and I may have returned my item, but it was an absolute pain. I'm never going to come back to this store again. And on the similar side, from the business metrics, we can go through a few examples of where the model might be vague, might give misinformation, might also be expensive or slow. Then that's just not what we want. And we want to have that insight and observability into what models we're deploying before we have real life customers going in and interacting with those too.
Yeah, absolutely. And the chatbot example is great because I think everyone can relate to it. I sometimes worry, that the nerdy folks, myself among them, are more interested in some of this more advanced stuff, like these deep research agents. And certainly there's examples that can be drawn from there as well. If you think of kind of a financial analyst agent, being able to look at a stock price and then give some kind of prescription whether to buy or sell or what's the forecast for the stock. It's got to get the stock price right. It's got to get this information right, and that's a right or wrong. But when it creates a report, whether it be forecasting or looking into the past of the stock, that report needs to be verified. And so evaluations
Yeah,
can be created along those lines as well, whether it's something automated and programmatic or whether it's a human being that can go in and verify and confirm and check sources to make sure they exist. So this certainly is the chatbot's the kind of low-hanging fruit, easy example that again everyone can relate to. But even these more advanced agentic workflows definitely fall into this bucket where there's room for traditional evaluation, but you quickly need to move forward into the less traditional, more subjective type of evaluations if you're really gonna produce the best possible experience for the end user.
100%. And as the sort of technology stacks, right, and we build these agents that are built on top of these LLM systems, then my experience of speaking and working with customers in the space is that the need for this human interaction increases as the level of complexity increases, right? Because the outcome gets more subjective. The choice of did you go down right the correct decision path, and so on and so forth gets even more kind of case specific, like so. Um, but that's why we're so excited today to be discussing rubric-based evaluation. So whereas previously it might just be you infer your model, you generate your content, and then you evaluate the quality of that content against some reference sources, or then also you might be able to generate some other metrics. And I think we'll talk later on things like cost and latency as well, and use this in your decision-making process. We're really excited to present this rubric-based evaluation discussion. And when we're thinking about checklists, preferential ranking, scoring on different categories, this is customizable on a product basis, on a use case basis, and as we deploy to different user groups as well. This can ensure that we have alignment across the business when we're delivering these applications and can prioritize between the different tools as well. And so at the end, we'll share a resource where we have a document that will be accessible to everybody on the webinar today, where we set out an example of how we can define a rubric and go through and evaluate this, and then the outcomes that we've derived from here. This visual was extracted from that. When we're thinking about, and the example used in that paper is a text-to-speech model. And so we can see some of those examples here. And we've already discussed the case of chatbots and agents. But Russ, what are some of the examples of the key criteria metrics that we can use when we're defining these rubrics?
Right. I mean, I mentioned friendliness or politeness or empathy. These are some of the things here that are again subjective that you can kind of place on a scale, like we're seeing here, so that you can assign a score to. Another one that I think of is kind of a search agent, where you're asking a question and it may be a very technical question, but you as an audience person, you as a user are not necessarily a super technical user. And being able to find that balance in this subjective scale of how detailed, how technical, how esoteric should the response be. So being able, I think, to be able to grade these things on a scale becomes incredibly important.
Mm, yeah, those kind of more those metrics that correspond more to how the AI interacts with the human user, right? Rather than just like the success of the system from a completely objective level. It's actually how is the model interacting? How does it feel to use this system, and getting a sense of that in terms of quality.
Exactly. And then again, kind of along the sense here of the rubrics, figuring out how important is that? How important is it that the end user, that the details be presented in a certain way versus the end user being able to understand X% of the response that's been provided. So, I
Mm.
know that I don't want to steal any of your thunder, but part of the rubric is weighting different decisions. And I know that goes into figuring out business value as well. I mentioned before kind of this quality, cost, latency, and you start to have to make decisions about, well, are we willing to sacrifice a little latency for accuracy? Or can we let it take a little bit longer if the cost is lower? So we pinpoint these different values or different performance metrics in the evaluation to start trying to decide which are more important and how do we weight those.
Yes, absolutely. And for those of you who do refer to the paper afterwards, there are some really nice kind of visualizations of how being able to view these metrics in different kind of graphical forms can help you make decisions about the business applications of the model as well. Um, and maybe the last piece before we go through to how this process looks, right? When we're thinking about using our rubrics as evals, the last thing to discuss is that we can include these metrics that are human generated, but we can also use them in conjunction with maybe those programmatic or LLM as a judge driven metrics as well as other business applications such as latency or cost or on those kind of pieces that then can inform which model we use in which specific use case.
Yeah, and I want to say to this actually, maybe this is something that I say at the end, kind of when giving the wrap up, but I'll just say it now. We tout and we express the importance of evaluations in building a good application that you feel comfortable putting in front of the end user, and there's nothing more important. I was excited being invited to this and starting to kind of pour through all of your material and seeing this rubric-based methodology, because it's not just this theoretical, high level discussing the importance, but actually figuring out from a tactical perspective, how do we do this? How do we start creating algorithms that weight certain evaluations based upon the outcome and the metrics that we want to weigh the most heavily? So it was refreshing and frankly very cool to see a game plan, to see a way to start doing this that wasn't simply expressing again the importance of evaluations, but how do you do this? What approach can you take? How do you put this down on paper? How do you make this concrete and actually be able to produce results at the end of your rubric-based evaluation that really are going to provide guidance for optimization, for improvement, and really giving a threshold for when this thing's ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think today we've been discussing a lot of the why, and then that paper goes into the real details of the how. And when we're thinking about implementing this rubric-based evaluation, how that can work in practice too. And thank you for the kind words as well. I'll forward those on to the
I'm sure I'm getting
the
it
team
again,
too,
stealing
Russ.
your thunder probably, but hopefully just take it as promotion for the rest of the
It's
webinar.
great. It's great. Fantastic. So basically now we've discussed what these rubric-based evals are and beforehand why they are important. So if we sort of tie these together now and think about this model development process, and so like this loop is pretty crude, and there are probably several more branches and spirals that you could go down, right? And a few of those we've touched on already. But basically, by leveraging these rubric-based evals, we can have more insight into where our models are failing, and so less wasted iteration, more useful development. And so we can also reduce that iteration time as well. And so that's if we have the right tooling around defining and basically implementing these evals, which is kind of what we're here to discuss today. I think one of the key pieces on the actual implementation side is that when we're thinking about bringing in a rubric is that we want to start simple. And you can see this example is a very simple case for a generative video setup where we have two video cases side by side, right? And you can say, which one is blurrier? If we know my model has a blurriness problem, then we can go in and we can just have this very simple preference ranking example in this use case. And as you can see on the left, we can support a range of different modalities. And so this is now when we're thinking about the on-call platform in particular for creating these rubrics and defining these eval processes. We've worked with customers from, text-based, video, image, audio. You can see on the left-hand side. Also worked with some customers in the physical AI space who are using VLA models, and they basically need to implement human evals too. So if we're thinking about, is our robot arm picking up an object smoothly, or is it really jaggedy? And so we can't just use a binary eval for that. We want to actually inform the specific route it's taken to. So Russ, when we're thinking about these eval processes, we looked at the simple example before of the preferencing that could be done by a human, but it could also be done by a model, right? We have means to do these rubric-based evals by passing JSON to our models and this kind of structured output. So what are the kind of evals that we can do that are maybe not human in that regard?
Right. Well, yeah, no, that's a good, the formatting one is a good example. And, I think there are different times that you need the format to be right. It ends up being kind of a more traditional one, and this traditional, untraditional definition. But yeah, does the output look right? I often think of these ones that you do programmatically, especially LLM as a judge, as it's the best thing you got, because I think you're really often actually trying to scale the human in that case. Now, again, there's ones where it wouldn't be the best fit for a human, but you simply can't have a human look at a million record data set and go through whether it be labeling or evaluating certain results. So that's when these LLM as a judges, I think, come in handy. But because of the nature of the LLM, because of why we're doing all this, and we haven't used the buzzword yet, non-deterministic, that kind of comes up in all these conversations. But because LLMs present this challenge of non-determinism and unpredictability, there's nothing better than getting human eyes and ears, in this case, on the result set. But often I think you can build out LLM judges that are good enough to scale the human, but they're not a replacement. And that's again the importance, looking at the rubric, looking at the work that you do at Encore, and being able to introduce the human into this is just invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think one of the kind of issues as well is that having these rubrics is that, a lot of the time, if we want that interpretability, excuse me, to be done by a human, then it's very hard to get that same context from a model at the moment. And maybe these things will change, maybe these things will evolve. But as you say, when we're working on these kind of non-deterministic use cases, then we need to get that context from a human who can actually give that fair assessment, right? And so you can see now a more kind of extended example here, and where we have a case where we're evaluating the clarity of the audio, the naturalness of the audio, these metrics that will be hard to extract in a metric format, and we want to basically use a human context for.
Yep.
Fantastic.
And frankly,
so all of this kind
so
of
human,
oh,
so human to want from an audio perspective. Can you figure out the technical intonations and tone changes using a technical method? Of course you can. Can you try to simulate subjectivity using an LLM as a judge? Of course you can. But in this case, is there anything better than the human ear? I think for some of these, probably not.
Exactly. And especially when your model is at the core of your IP as well, then this can be your real edge and your real differentiator as a business too, in this regard.
Yep.
Fantastic. So basically, I think this slide is put together to summarize the iteration loop that we saw previously of how that can look with this rubric-based evaluation. And we're thinking of all of these different inputs from all of our different models and contexts as well. And then how we can drive this with our generative system. And then have this human validation layer, which is so important, of basically including that for your evals and how this can then feed back into your learning pipeline too. So I think we're now going to do a quick demonstration of both the Encore platform and then weights and biases and how we can basically combine these two. And we'll kind of discuss how we can capture and define these rubrics within Encore and then view, monitor, and track all of these outputs in weights and biases too. So we can see this first example here, where we are looking at two videos side by side. So this is similar to the blurriness example we saw, where we have these different criteria, right? We might want to see the quality of the lip sync based on this output here. And then we might want to see the same on the right-hand side and be able to play these videos in one session, have a human evaluator go through and fill in this context here on the left-hand side. Which do I prefer, my left or my right, for example? And then as we build this out, we can add in specific artifacts and say, what's important here? Okay, I've got an issue with visual artifacts appearing. My mouth is forming a weird shape of my face, that famous Will Smith era of generative video that we're all familiar with as well. And then basically have our annotators go through and fill in these examples too. And feeding back to our original kind of setup, when we were discussing this problem, as we were thinking, okay, I'm a user and I want to return this drill. And so that was the example that you set out earlier, Russ, right? Where we're thinking about, okay, I bought a drill, I want to return it. I don't have my receipt. I just want to basically give you my email and have this sorted out. And we can see on the left-hand side, we have all of these different classes that we've defined to either tag irrelevance. We can also flag at the top level, do we have the correct identification of our product, yes or no? And so some of these kind of more important binary metrics, and then some of these more subjective tags that we can say, such as friendliness or usefulness of our agent as well. And this is where we're really bringing in that kind of human context into our eval process. And when we're building out these specific rubrics, we can think here of like, okay, we have all of these different examples and we can add those. And as we're working through, as we iterate, we can see based on our model's performance previously, and that will tie nicely into what we're going to go into next on the weights and biases side, basically how we can go about defining these rubrics and adding to them through time as we discover more kind of holes and different applications in our specific business areas. The last piece that I wanted to emphasize is that as well as having the method of defining these rubrics, and then Encore also providing the interface for the humans to go in and fill these out, we can also conjoin these kind of LLM as a judge outputs and maybe have a human then go through and assess the quality of this model generated eval then that we can basically have, and we can create these pipelines like so of these different routes. And crucially, all of this is accessible via the API as well. And I think this will kind of mentally lead nicely into where you're going to go, Russ, where we think, right, so if we've defined this model generation and we've created our output, we want somebody to go in and create this eval using their rubric. And then here we can make a call using a webhook and via the API to then load this output into weights and biases where we can kind of monitor and track our experiments, right?
That's right, exactly.
Fantastic. So I think we're going to swap screen share, and then you're going to take a look at when we've actually done these specific evals on our different data modalities, how we can track these in a kind of pipelining basis in W&B.
Exactly. And I'll check with you, Oscar. Are you able to see my screen?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So I'm actually going to give the before and after here. So your demo is great, and it shows kind of this middle step then, because the first thing we need to do is have the application create the output that then can be made available in Encore. And then from there, we want to take the result data from the human evaluations that have been performed in Encore that Oscar showed and be able to incorporate those and make those accessible inside of Weave. Now, this clearly is not weights and biases W&B Weave right here. This is a demo site for a fictional electronics retailer. And I'm on the support page here. This is the support chatbot we've been talking about the whole time. I can see the products I bought recently, and I'm going to ask this chatbot here, I'm wondering if I can return this Chromebook that I bought recently. And my chatbot responds, thank you for reaching out. I see that you purchased. It gets the date. It says I'm still within the return period. Would I like to initiate the return? And I will say, yes, please. And in short order, if everything works properly, which hopefully it will, you'll see that the return's been initiated. So this is great. This is the end user or customer experience with the chatbot. But let's now look at Weave. And I'm gonna go into Weave from here. And you saw a couple screenshots before, but this is the traces page. This is what I mentioned when Weave is tracing and tracking all of your inputs and outputs. This is where it's collected, and this is where it's made visible to the developer. And all of these traces here are the two that I just entered a moment ago. I'm wondering if I can return the Chromebook, and then yes, please was my response to the response. And I can click and drill down into each of these, and I can see the entire trace for this interaction. I can see it in a variety of different ways. I can see the different steps it goes through. It determines, is this a question about returns or a question about products? The RAG content generation, a number of different steps, each of which is kind of ripe for optimization and analysis. And then here finally on the right-hand side, I can see all of the inputs, including the system prompt, the RAG content, and all of the outputs, right? How did the application respond? What is the reason it responded in the way it did? I can also see the code, and I can get a summary of this, including the cost and the latency. So that's what tracing our application looks like. And when we talk about evaluations here, there's a couple of important ingredients. There's the data set, which in this case is the output that we're grabbing from the application. And there's the scores. I mentioned earlier that we have a number of different scores looking at latency or safety or hallucinations. In this case, in terms of flexibility, being able to incorporate evaluations from elsewhere, the demo that Oscar showed inside of Encord, this is a score. This human becomes a scorer in our kind of our recipe to create our evaluation. So if I go back now to our traces page, I can actually create a data set, and we didn't talk much about creating the data sets in this sense, but the importance of data cannot be understated. And while synthetic data is often used to do evaluations, if you can get real data from your real interactions with customers, there's really nothing better. So Weave allows you to create these data sets from production data or synthetic data for that matter, but from production data. And then we can take this data, and this is the data set that we are then taking and moving into Encord. Now this is all text. It's not quite as dazzling as and exciting as the lip syncing that Oscar showed, but equally important to get in front of this human evaluator, this human in the loop to look at these, whether it be in the entire data set or looking at samples. But this is the data that then we would move behind the scenes, wave the magic wand. The API is moving this into Encord so that human evaluations can take place there. And then from there, the evaluations have been complete. That information is recorded inside of Encord, and then we can move those back into Weave. This is the evaluations page in Weave. And, it again, the initial page is a tabular assessment of all of the different evaluations. And in this case, we're looking at different large language models that are powering our support agent here. A couple open API models, a Google model, and we can scroll across here and we can see some of the scores from the evaluations that we've done. Now, I mentioned before comparisons and kind of comparisons driving iteration and iteration, driving the optimization. I can click on a bunch of these and compare them. And this is similar to the screenshot you may have noticed when I introduced weights and biases originally, but here we get that thorough and complete comparison. And I have here, of course, the hallucination score. Oscar showed an example of the friendliness, a human being able to assess the friendliness rather than an LLM as a judge doing it. it is easy to take that and include that in this evaluation set that you're bringing here, and then just being able to create these charts, whether it be the spider or radar chart here that lets you really compare these different versions or along each of the different evaluation measures, and then decide from there which model is working best, whether it be from a latency perspective or a human determined friendliness or accuracy perspective. So being able to incorporate all of that together, flexible by nature, allowing human evaluations from Encord, allowing, evaluations from, that you may build in programmatically as well. But this is where you collect that. This is where the information becomes accessible, can be shared with your teammates, and you start making decisions about how do we improve our application, which metrics, if we're weighting them, figuring out, what's the best thing to attack? How do we create the best possible user experience? Um, should also mention, you can drill down everywhere here as well. Comparisons are key. Pivot and look at things from a vertical perspective as opposed to horizontal. But this is the evaluations page and kind of the primary spot you're going to go to start making decisions about how to optimize and when you're ready to deploy into production.
Very cool. Yeah, and I love that you're able to see both those metrics generated for different models, different times, different experiment tracking as well, and also compare all of those metrics from those human generated, those LLM as a judge generated, and then maybe some of the more kind of automated metric based stats as well. And you can use that to weight your decision making. That's so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Fantastic. So I'm aware that we are coming up on time and we want to have time for Q&A. There are a couple of questions in the channel. And there is one on how does one mitigate biases in human and programmatic rubric assessments? Russ, do you want to jump in? Otherwise, I'm happy to take that.
No, I'll let you jump in on that one first, and then I'll have something
Okay.
to add probably.
Yeah, so I think I can speak maybe on the human side of how do you mitigate bias. I think it then comes down to an awful lot of who you have evaluating the system, right? You want to have people who are representative of the user group and the people at hand who are working on that system. And then basically you want to also be able to have a view of the distribution of the users, as well as being able to kind of see the outputs of what they've generated too. So it's part of being able to collate not only the output of that human-driven eval, but also be able to have a summary of who created each evaluation, again, which is something that we also have as part of the workflow builder that we showed earlier on the Encord side. But yeah, Russ, I'm not sure if you have anything to add in there.
Yeah, I mean the human one, yeah, I think kind of diversity of opinions and getting a number of
Yeah.
different people. If from I always am like, should I say this? Should I expose myself for the my background in political theory and there's this concept of who will guard the guardians, and if you look at Plato's The Republic, he introduces these noble guardians who will guard everything, and I think of these as kind of the evaluations, but through time you realize, well, are the guardians really so perfect? And are the evaluations and the LLM as a judge is really so perfect? And in the same regard as you probably want to get a diverse number of humans from, different backgrounds if you can, or different perspectives to be able to do this kind of evaluation to mitigate risk and decrease bias as much as possible. When you build these programmatic evaluations, these two are LLM powered applications, and you can certainly supply a different LLM, a different model, whether it be different GPT versions or using Claude or some of these other ones you saw in the demo a moment ago, changing the prompts so that you start to create scale or volume, and then you can kind of start to create almost averages of some of these scores so that hopefully because you're taking from a variety of different sources to do the evaluation, you're not leaning too heavily on one model that's been trained in a certain way using certain content, but you're really creating a larger, more diverse number of evaluators, even if they may be performing basically the same function or the same evaluation.
Fantastic.
Throw a
Um,
little, any chance I get to throw a little Play-Doh in, I'm
yeah,
always
very
game.
impressive. Very impressive. I didn't know that about you, but that's great. Thank you so much. Well, yeah, I think we will wrap things up there. We are 2 minutes over time, so thank you everybody for joining us today on behalf of Oncord and Weights and Biases. So yeah, and then definitely we can share after the session the slides, which have the link to the PDF document that we were describing on how to do those evals as well. But from myself and Russ, thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, we will see you at the next one.